Gunhouse is unique in a lot of ways, but one most prominent is that it's both simple, yet somehow confusing. At a glance, anyone who is familiar with video games could most likely understand the premise. Match the colors into even-numbered squares, slide them to the left or right, which creates firepower to hold the incoming enemies at bay. However, reading some of the reviews on Steam and on the Google Play Store, you may get the impression this is either a deceivingly complicated game or just poorly designed. The former is debatable, but the latter, I can assure you, is not true. The combination of tower defense and puzzler works surprisingly well, but what's more interesting are the many ways Gunhouse separates itself from other games of both genres. Much like how the wonderful 101 transformed the mundane act of swapping over to a new weapon into a gameplay mechanic all its own, the same can be said for Gunhouse and selecting a tower. Matching blocks of the same type turns the otherwise mechanically simple action of placing a new tower into something more engaging. Think of how it works in a traditional tower defense game. You do need to keep plenty of things in mind. There is strategy and decision making, but the act of creating the tower itself boils down to clicking on which one you can afford, then clicking on the map. Regardless of if it appeals to anyone, placing a tower in Gunhouse is mechanically more demanding. This approach of turning something that was simple into something more complicated wouldn't work for everything. A game isn't inherently better or more fun because more inputs are required of the player to accomplish a certain task. The reason why I think it works for the tower defense genre is, well, there's a lot of time when the player doesn't do anything. Of course, part of the fun is to see your towers in action, but it should raise a red flag when so many of those games have a fast forward button. There's always going to be some amount of downtime without much to do besides plan on what you'll do when you get enough money. One could argue this is the fault of the currency slowing things down, not necessarily the required inputs, but to that I would say, Gunhouse kind of has a currency system of its own. And no, I don't mean the money used for buying upgrades and guns. The timer itself, which always stops your puzzle progress no matter what, acts as the main limiter. If the amount of space and money are what stops the player from continuing to add towers in a traditional tower defense game, then the amount of space and time they have is what stops them in Gunhouse. The guns also go away after each use. Because the player's performance in the puzzler side of things is what determines their offense and the tower defense side of things, it only makes sense that they would disappear, making sure no matter how well they played in the past, playing well in the present is just as important. Once the garage door closes and the action begins again, the towers don't even fire automatically, the player needs to activate them individually. This just goes to show how much more micromanaging is required in Gunhouse. Given all of this information, we can begin to appreciate what Gunhouse is truly offering. It manages to push the boundaries of tower defense games, not by increasing the scale, but by decreasing it. There's only one map, 3 consistent lanes, the waves and levels go by at a quick pace, placing towers and using them on enemies is a much more involved process, and so on. Even ignoring the puzzle mechanics, this reduction in scale tests a different skill in players. While Gunhouse does technically share the same basic premise of the more traditional titles in the genre, it has much more room for tactical decision-making. Strategy is present in almost every game to a degree, but in Plants vs. Zombies or Kingdom Rush or others like that, most of your brain will be thinking about the entire level, how to stay alive until the last wave, and how to build up your defenses to withstand that last wave. Some of this thinking even takes place outside of gameplay, like optimizing stats to min-max your arsenal for a certain level, or picking which plants to use in tandem to take out specific zombies. There is a small amount of that in Gunhouse, which I'll get to, but for the most part the choices I was making were happening to suit the current wave, the enemies on screen at that time. If enemies are making off with your orphans, creating a beach ball gun would be a bad idea given how slow it fires. If you have enemies pestering you on the top lane, even though it is a little trickier, you'll need to focus on getting a weapon on that top slot ASAP, otherwise you'll be attacked for another turn without you making any progress. Perhaps a gun isn't a concern, but a special instead, like getting enough forks to create a shield so you can defend against the boss's next attack. This is at least slightly significant, as if you're accustomed to sliding blocks to the left, it might take you a second to realize you now need to create something that can slide to the right. The point is, Gunhouse is more about responding to threats than it is about planning for them. In that respect, it shares some of the same characteristics found in the action genre, requiring quicker reflexes than most traditional tower defense games. There's a sense of instantaneousness lurking behind every action and reaction. Towers can be created as quickly as you can slide blocks around, and they activate the moment you click on them, even depleting their entire ammo reserves in mere moments regardless of how beefed up they were. The consequences are also more immediate. If things aren't going smoothly, defeat is usually seconds away, then it's on to trying it again. Unless you pause the game or stop playing, you just aren't going to see much downtime. We could envision a version of Gunhouse where this is pushed even further, where there aren't any stoppages on the puzzler side of things with both phases happening simultaneously. For that to work at all, I would imagine the enemies would have to be much slower than they currently are, otherwise it would be a chaotic mess. I would also suspect that this would cause players to panic more often, potentially sacrificing the big blocks in favor of the smaller ones just to get a gun out as fast as possible. How it works now, I think, is almost perfect. The 18 to 7 second ratio gives plenty of time to construct a few big guns once the player gets good enough, but still puts pressure on them to not dilly-dally before the garage door shuts. The 7 seconds of tower defense action can be extended depending on how quickly you fire your guns and which ones you use, however. This has the potential to be really annoying, as you'll naturally be attacked for a longer amount of time if you used a beach ball gun or accidentally waited too long to use a special attack or what have you. However, this could easily be another example of how Gunhouse subtly steers the player to make informed tactical decisions on short notice. Maybe it's in your benefit not to activate a gun if it has no chance of taking everyone out, as it will last longer than 7 seconds. Really, my only complaint of how the timer currently works is that those 18 seconds aren't equal across the entire puzzle space. Even though the garage door closing makes it clear when the timer is winding down and looks nice overall, the closing process starting 5 seconds before your time is up means you don't actually have 18 seconds to create a gun for your top slot. That's already the trickiest spot to account for, since you need a block to at least land on the second row from the top. You can't see the blocks above it, and you can't haphazardly remove the ones below it either, which is one way the bottom row is so easy to account for. Certain gun loadouts also favor the lower lanes of enemies, like the beach ball and dragon shooters. Both can be placed on the top slot and still end up hitting enemies on the lower lanes. If you want a beach ball to hit a top lane enemy, you need to place it in the top slot. This gets less problematic once you get better at the game, but even still, if you're one row away from getting a full-sized block, hoping for random chance to save you the day, only for the garage door to remove that possibility feels like the game is forcing you to make a concession. I don't quite have a solution for this besides different window dressings. Sliding that garage door from the bottom, left, right, or even the middle somehow would still create similar issues. Maybe add 3 more seconds onto the clock so you really do get 18 seconds on that top row, and maybe you could think of the extra time with the lower sections as a bonus. With that line of thinking, however, we may as well cut out the middleman and say the real time is 15 seconds, thus finally doing away with this thought experiment for the time being. Isolating the puzzle mechanics, the tile matching gameplay shares qualities with the likes of Tetris and Puyo Puyo, but of course the goal isn't to chain a lot of matches or remove blocks from the puzzle field, instead create bigger blocks to suit your current predicament. It also vaguely resembles a match 3 puzzle game, but thankfully the gameplay brings so much more to the table than those of that type could ever dream of. I think, however, where Gunhouse begins to stumble in its tile matching half is with the bonus tiles at the top. It isn't explained to the player, but sliding a block of tiles the same type as the one up top to make a gun or a special grants you a very large bonus, making it far more powerful than if it wasn't the corresponding tile. I don't necessarily have a problem with the idea of granting bonuses that encourage playing a certain way, however, with how random the assortment of blocks can be, it sometimes just doesn't work with your current set of tiles, meaning if you wanted to keep your bonus streak going, you'll waste a lot of your time throwing tiles away to spawn more. It's also frustrating knowing that the guns you might need to suit your current wave will break your streak if created. If a very specific tower needs to be constructed to stay alive or rescue an orphan, not getting that bonus could be the difference between success and failure, so it seemingly being left up to random chance feels very unsatisfying. The bonuses also don't gel well with the fact that you can't throw away already made blocks without constructing a gun or a special. Creating a tower using a large portion of the puzzle space means gravity will inevitably create guns you don't need sometimes. If it's one of the 2 tiles that won't provide a bonus, this means either your puzzle space just got much smaller, or if you're unlucky enough, it may completely screw you over if you've been trying to keep a streak going. I suppose the bonus streak not providing anything to the player, not even a number on the side, is reason enough to never worry about it. The only time you may even be aware of a streak existing is through the objectives. Besides one very strange quirk I'll talk about later, the objectives don't offer much of interest, they mainly provide extra money to spend at the shop. The shop system is by far the worst part of the game, simply because it doesn't even try to explain what anything means. It's obvious buying new weapons will unlock them, but you can also upgrade those guns, which I suppose we can infer makes them stronger? I genuinely don't know, since there isn't any damage information, text explanation, or visual effect in-game that shows why a level 3 gun is worse than a level 7 gun. There's an armor stat as well, which is also unexplained. I felt safer with it upgraded, but that could just be the placebo effect in action. The only one that is very clear is the health stat, which adds an extra heart to the top of the screen. Ignoring the lack of clarity the shop offers, it also has the same bullshit min-maxing garbage that Kingdom Rush and others have, where you can refund the upgrades for the same amount you originally paid for them, meaning you're able to respec your stats anytime you like to fit the current level. This is what I mentioned I dislike about the tower defense genre: out-of-game strategy, planning for the next level while staring at a menu screen. While staring at the menus as often as I unfortunately had to, I noticed a lot of minor issues that slowly got on my nerves the more time went by. When buying the first upgrade to any gun, that selection shifts upwards to make room for the refund option, which makes the constant respecking of your arsenal that much more irritating. You for some reason can't quickly retry a level from the pause menu, you'll have to quit out to the main menu and click on Play Gunhouse again. Even though controlling the game with a mouse emulates the touchscreen sliding effect much better than a controller does, the A and B button prompts are all over the game, and they're seemingly for an Xbox controller, even though this originally came out for the PlayStation Vita. You'll need to click on the area close to the B back prompt, and the A select option is never used, as of course I'm using a mouse. Finally, the leaderboards say Hardcore mode, even though it's tracking what the game calls Survival mode. This is seemingly only an issue in the PC port, as on the Vita and Switch versions, it's called Hardcore mode like it should be. I don't know what to make of any of this, since it all seems so easy to fix. I can only say that because they were all such tiny quality of life or text box issues, the fact that this game currently exists on Steam in this condition is baffling. What's more baffling is what happens after day 10 in the story mode of the game, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The text blurbs in between levels of the story mode were surprisingly interesting. You seem to be the caretaker of an orphanage, and need to fend off these monsters that want to attack the house and steal the children. It talks of the children and their day-to-day duties, confusion on why these metal monstrosities are attacking in the first place, loss of hope given that no one else is coming to their aid, and even details a child dying painfully in the middle of the night. It can get pretty bleak, which contrasts well with the goofy art style, I think. Seeing the orphans get grabbed and eaten by giant ice cream men is the cherry on top as far as I'm concerned. I'm entirely sold on this premise, but unfortunately there isn't much more to it than that, and this is where the quirk with the objectives come back into focus. Before day 10, you'll see objectives to get to a certain day, and eventually to see the ending. After the last boss fight, which is a good send-off since he can keep attacking you as you're working on your puzzle, it's revealed that this giant man wasn't a god like once thought, just a metal husk once more. It's implied there isn't anyone out there to help, but they'll keep fighting for as long as they can. The credits roll, and afterwards you can keep playing past day 10. Now, you no longer get any text blurb after a successful level completion, just a random pro tip like you normally see after a failed attempt. Fair enough, the credits already played, everything after day 10 is just a bonus. The objectives will be the usual, sometimes about upgrading guns or taking down bosses. After a while though, you'll begin to see cryptic tasks show up. Learn of the ritual definitely sounds like the story is continuing, I think, but the game marks it as completed after the next level is finished. A few more of these pop up later on, like meet the scrivener to pay the fee, which again gets completed after the next level. I never made it to day 100, or to even day 30, so, I mean, there's always a possibility that more story gets revealed after a certain amount of days, but it's hard to tell. This game isn't talked about much online, so I couldn't find anything definitive. All in all, Gunhouse is a game I think is really worth playing. The visuals are phenomenal, slapping you in the face with saturated cartoony drawings the whole way through, and the music is great as well, with some tracks being so catchy they stay in my head long after I finish playing. The gameplay is simple enough to understand at a glance, but complex enough to be confusing for people who don't stick with it. It's ideal for players like me, who tend to prefer quicker-paced tactical reactions instead of strategizing for a longer timescale. At the very least, it's a nice change of pace if you become used to the usual offerings of the tower defense genre. Even though I wish a few of the quality of life issues were fixed, and the shop system in and of itself bummed me out considerably, being able to shoot beach balls at a gigantic ice cream cone made it all worth it in the end.